Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, walking to your safe, and realizing that the savings inside are now illegal contraband. Imagine a world where owning real money, sound money, makes you a criminal enemy of the state. You might think this sounds like a dystopian novel, or maybe Soviet Russia, but this happened right here in the United States of America. On April 5th, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the most controversial document in American financial history. It was called Executive Order 6102. With the stroke of a pen, he didn't just change the law, he confiscated the wealth of an entire nation. The order was simple and brutal. Every American citizen was ordered to turn in their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve. And if you refused, the penalty was $10,000, which is nearly $250,000 today, or 10 years in federal prison. Think about that. You could go to jail for a decade just for trying to protect your own life savings from the banks. This was the day the land of the free made financial independence illegal. But the real crime wasn't the confiscation. The real crime was the math that came next. To understand the heist, you have to understand the desperation. The year is 1933. The Great Depression is at its absolute worst. The American banking system has collapsed. Over 4,000 banks have failed. Millions of people watched their paper savings vanish into thin air when the local bank locked its doors. People stopped trusting paper. They wanted something real. They wanted gold. They started pulling their money out of the system and hoarding it under mattresses and in floorboards. This created a run on the banks. The Federal Reserve was terrified. The government was broke, and they needed to print more money to fund their massive government programs. But there was a problem. In 1933, the U.S. was still on the gold standard. The law said that for every dollar the government printed, they had to have 40 cents worth of gold in the vault to back it up. The government was trapped. They wanted to print billions in stimulus, but they didn't have the gold to back it. They had two choices. Choice A, stop spending money and let the economy heal naturally. Or choice B, take the gold from the people. FDR chose option B. He declared a national banking holiday. He closed every bank in the country for a week, and while the doors were locked, he drafted the order to seize the physical assets of the American people. They sold it as patriotism. They told the public, stop hoarding, help the country. But it wasn't patriotism. It was preparation for the greatest flip in financial history. But you might be asking, how did they enforce it? How did the government know who had the gold? This is the dark chapter of the story that usually gets left out of the history books. The government didn't just ask nicely. They weaponized the banking system against the citizens. The executive order required banks to report the names of anyone who had withdrawn large amounts of gold prior to the order. If you had taken your money out to protect yourself, you were now on a list. The government issued threats that federal agents would check safe deposit boxes. There are stories from that era of people burying coffee cans full of gold coins in their backyards in the middle of the night, terrified that the FBI was watching. One man, a wealthy New York lawyer named Frederick Barber Campbell, decided to test the government. He walked into Chase National Bank and tried to withdraw 5,000 ounces of gold that he legally owned. The bank refused. Campbell sued. In response, the federal government indicted him. A grand jury brought criminal charges against a U.S. citizen simply for wanting to hold his own property. It sent a chill down the spine of every American. The message was clear: compliance is mandatory. However, like every financial law in American history, there was a loophole for the elite. When FDR wrote the order, he included a specific exemption for gold coins having a recognized special value to collectors of rare and unusual coins. This was the numismatic loophole. If you were a poor factory worker, you likely held standard gold coins. Savings, those were confiscated. But if you were a wealthy aristocrat, you likely held rare collector's coins. Those were exempt. So, while the working class was forced to hand over their wealth for paper money, the wealthy collectors were allowed to keep their gold legally. It was a classic case of rules for thee, but not for me. The rich stayed in gold, the poor were forced into paper. Here is the mechanics of the scam. This is the part that should make you angry. When the government forced you to turn in your gold, they didn't steal it outright. They bought it from you. They paid you the official exchange rate, $20.67 per ounce. Millions of Americans lined up. They handed over their family heirlooms, their savings, their retirement security. In exchange, they got a stack of paper Federal Reserve notes. By May of 1933, the government had collected nearly all the gold in private hands. The citizens held paper, the government held the gold. And then, the trap snapped shut. Once the gold was safely in the government vaults, FDR passed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. Overnight, he officially raised the price of gold from $20.67 to $35 an ounce. Do the math. The government forced you to sell your gold for $20. Then, they immediately declared that same gold was worth $35. They instantly devalued the paper dollars they had just given you by 40%. It was an instant profit of billions of dollars for the U.S. Treasury, stolen directly from the purchasing power of the middle class. If you had kept your gold, your wealth would have jumped 69%. But because you followed the law, you lost nearly half of your net worth. This wasn't economic policy. It was a wealth transfer, from the pockets of the citizens to the vaults of the state. This theft was so brazen that it went all the way to the Supreme Court. These were known as the Gold Clause cases. Investors sued the government, arguing that the confiscation was unconstitutional. They argued that a contract is a contract, and the government couldn't just rewrite the value of money. The Supreme Court voted. The fate of the American economy hung in the balance. And in a decision that shocked the legal world, the court ruled in favor of the government by a vote of 5-4. Just one single vote. One judge decided that the government's right to regulate money was more important than the individual's right to own property. Justice James McReynolds, who voted against it, was so furious that he famously wrote, "The Constitution is gone." With the legal battles over, the government needed a place to hide the evidence. In 1936, they finished construction on the United States Bullion Depository in Kentucky. We know it as Fort Knox. Train after train arrived, carrying the melted down savings of the American people. They took the coins that had your grandfather's face on them, melted them into bars, and locked them away behind a 22-ton blast door. This marked the end of sound money in America. Before 1933, a dollar was a claim check for gold. You owned a piece of the rock. After 1933, a dollar was a fiat currency. It was backed by nothing but the word of the politicians. The government had successfully severed the link between the people and real assets. They established a monopoly on value. And once the government had the gold and you had the paper, they were free to print as much paper as they wanted. This is the moment the modern inflation era began. They told you the confiscation was temporary, but it wasn't until 1974, 40 years later, that President Gerald Ford finally signed a law making it legal for Americans to own gold bullion again. For 40 years, the land of the free banned the ultimate form of freedom. History is a warning. Most people think that was 1933. That could never happen today. But ask yourself, is the government less in debt today than they were in 1933? No, they are $34 trillion in debt. Is the banking system more stable? No. The difference is, next time, they won't need to send agents to your house to collect gold coins. In a digital world, confiscation is just a click of a button. If the government introduces a central bank digital currency, they can freeze your purchasing power, devalue your savings, or expire your money whenever they want. The mechanics are different, but the goal is the same: control. In 1933, they forced you from gold to paper so they could control the supply. In the 2020s, they want to force you from paper to digital so they can control the transaction. The lesson of 1933 is simple. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. The government changed the rules of the game once to save themselves. They will do it again. The only question is, will you be holding the paper or the asset? Subscribe to Wealth Archive. We document the crimes of the past so you can survive the future.